Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, non-binary, distinguished guests, welcome to Ridiculous, the Life of a Clown. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ridiculous, Life of a Clown with me, Gherkin Picklewater. Today, my special guest is Michelle Matlock. Michelle, tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Hey, hello. Thank you for having me. My name is Michelle Matlock. I'm a performing artist, clown, producer, director, creative coach, teacher, all the things.
That's pretty great. You had a long career. You've been going at this for over 15 years, yeah?
Yeah. I've been sort of, I guess, in the clown and circus world since the year 2000.
Nice. So 22 years. That is a long haul. I believe I saw you at OVO myself when it came through San Francisco. But let's start at the beginning. Where did you get your start as a performer, and what brought you to performance in the first place?
Well, getting my start as a performer, I performed since I was, 6 years old. I don't know. My mom always put me into like performance summer camps and all those types of things, and I did theater through high school, and I did it through college. Went off to New York City to study acting at the National Shakespeare Conservatory. Graduated from there, and then just ended up staying in New York and doing shows, mostly theater at first, and then developing a one-person show that traveled all over the country too. But during all that, I got kind of scouted by ex-Ringling clowns that were hired to create a clowning program on Royal Caribbean's cruise lines ships. So me and my clown partner at the time, Amy Gordon, were teaching ourselves how to juggle, and Amy Gordon was convinced that we were clowns, although we had no background or training in it. She just had the idea that we should be clowning. And so we were making up little shows for ourselves in New York, and we were rehearsing in Washington Square Park because we couldn't afford a rehearsal space at the time. And Ringling clown, ex-Ringling clown, Brent Swanson, happened to be walking through the park that day and seeing us just being ridiculous. And she was one of the clowns creating this program for Royal Caribbean. So she approached us and asked us if we might be interested in this because they were looking for more female clowns to join the program. It was all men except for her. And we didn't know what it was, but it was a chance to go down to Florida and then eventually off to the Caribbean on the cruise ships. We got 6 weeks of intensive training with the Ringling clowns. We had to learn that style of makeup and all the gags and the skills, juggling and walking on stilts, and then teaching clowning to kids. It was like a 6 to 9 week intensive on Ringling style clowning. And we proceeded to be on ships doing that program and developing that program and learning about that type of clowning for over a year that we kind of trained with them. And then we continued to do that job for about 5 years. But when we got back to New York, we realized that after getting paid to perform like that every day and the clowning thing, that we couldn't go back to like doing our day jobs, in offices and shuffling plates and stuff. So we decided to put ourselves out there as a clown team, and we had all kinds of jobs at birthdays and events and just doing it. And then I auditioned for Circus Amok, which is Jennifer Miller's circus, outdoor sort of queer theater circus that traveled around in parks in New York City. And Amy got into Bindlestiff Family Circus, which I eventually played with Bindlestiff too. And so we were, sort of in that downtown New York circus theater scene. And then we both got hired. I ended up getting hired by Big Apple Circus Clown Care Unit. So I did about 4 years of hospital clowning, which was an amazing experience. And all that time I was writing a solo show that combined what I was learning with the circus with my theater background. did that solo show called the Mammy Project, traveled that all over the globe. And that was how I was kind of, I guess, discovered by Cirque du Soleil. One of the casting folks walked into one of those shows that I was doing, the Mammy Project, and then they asked me to audition after that show, and I ended up auditioning for them here back home where I'm from, Tacoma, Washington, near Seattle. And I ended up coming home and they were in Seattle holding auditions. So I auditioned for them there. And that was one of those just amazing, crazy auditions where it felt like I walked out of that audition a better performer. But it was one of those auditions where they, there's like 30 clowns, and then there's 15, and then there's 10, and then there's 5, and then finally there's 3 of us left. And they said that they liked what they saw, and they keep me on file. So I didn't really know what that meant, and Cirque du Soleil wasn't really on my radar as a thing that I could do. So they said, yeah, we keep a file and we submit you to different new creations. So about 4 years later, they called me to create the role of Ladybug for OVO. And so that was just really astonishing to me, coming from the acting world. Like, you go to audition, you either get it or you don't. You certainly aren't being called 4 years later. But anyway, that was the Cirque way. And so, yeah, so I went up to Montreal and spent 6 months up there creating the Ladybug character for OVO, which was a big top show. And then I ended up doing that big top show for about 6 years. And that big top show turned into an arena show. So I went back to Montreal and did the creation for the we got to recreate the clown characters for the arena show. And so then I traveled on that arena show. I mean, the whole thing, my whole time with Cirque was almost 10 years. So that's a little recap of how I got started and the journey that I've had. Been great.
That's pretty amazing. And it's a lot of different kinds of stuff to touch on. Let's start with clown care. What was it like getting into the clown care unit, and what were your experiences there? How was it for you?
Yeah, the clown care, the hospital clowning was unique and different. I feel like I was really green as a clown at the time that I got hired. So there was a lot for me to learn. I mean, I sort of had a natural physical comedy ability, but that style of clowning I hadn't had really a lot of experience in. So, I mean, I think they went ahead and cast me or hired me on my sort of natural ability, but then it was a learning curve for working in the hospital setting and working with those very amazing, experienced hospital clowns, and that style of clowning of just like the whole point is to go in a room and change the energy of a room in a very delicate way, and on top of all of the protocols in terms of wearing gloves or masks or whatever, depending on what situation you're walking into. And so that was a really, really intense, fun and rewarding, but very intense type of clowning. I mean, it definitely shaped me and gave me a sort of education in being funny in that way. And so, yeah, it definitely shaped, how I, my whole clowning journey for sure. It was because I got that job early on. I mean, I think at that time I had only been clowning on cruise ships for about 3 or 4 years. So yeah, it was an amazing experience, and I met just phenomenal performing artists that I still collaborate with today. I'm currently working with Laughter League, which is Dick and Tiffany, who I met through Clown Care, and then they sort of broke off and made their own hospital clowning organization called Laughter League, and they're out of Texas and New York, and they have, you know, they're running some clown programs all over the country. But I'm currently working with them as with their DEI stuff, and I'm doing some online workshops with them, and I'll probably go in person to some of the hospitals that they have the clowning program in, and do some clowning workshops with some of their newer clowns. But yeah, so I have these lifelong relationships with folks and connections with folks that are just amazing out of Clown Care. And a lot is sort of developed out of that. I mean, the Big Apple Clown Care doesn't exist anymore, but many of the leaders in the Big Apple Clown Care have sprouted off and made their own organizations. So yeah, so that was an amazing experience that I will never forget, and I carry with me, you know.
Let's talk a little bit about your start on the cruise ships.
Sure.
How does that go over? How does clown work on a cruise ship, and how was it received at the time that you were doing it?
Yeah, well, the idea that Royal Caribbean had was, so at the time they were creating these humongous ships. At the time they were the largest ships in the world, and the idea was that they sort of gutted out the middle of the ship and created a promenade, so it kind of looked like a street with little shops and restaurants and street lights. So the idea was that they would have street performance on those streets. And I think that's how that clowning program was called the Cruise Comics got started. And they would hire a group of 4 clowns and develop this material that would play each week. There were 7-day cruises. So we would perform on the promenade, and then we would do like little bits before the main like big name acts would go. We would be their kind of warm up, and we would do all kinds of things, juggling, balancing stuff, just different gags, banana eating gags, and just crazy characters that would show up before the show. And then we would show up randomly, you know, and up at the pool, or, you know, in the cafeteria, the restaurants. We would walk on stilts. They had these opening cruise parades and closing cruise parades. We would walk on stilts and do all those skills. It was phenomenal, and it really was very popular. Cruise ships sort of live off of these surveys that they give to the cruisers at the end of the week, and we were always like highest on the evaluation, and they loved it. And I think a lot of the cruise directors and people that are running these ships were really surprised that it was so popular. And so it was a great experience. I mean, you know, it had its bumps and things. You know, with clowning, each clown we're also just different and distinct, that it was hard because they wanted to sort of put us in a kind of like a type, you know, like you have 4 clowns. If those 4 clowns couldn't do it, you just get 4 other clowns to come in and fit the same costumes and fit all the same things. And that didn't really work because, you know, as you probably know, clowns have individual skills and types and bodies, and, you know, so there was some bumps in the road of how to maintain that program. And I think eventually they just began to hire certain duos that they liked to fulfill some of those positions. So me and Amy Gordon did that for a few years, where they just hired the 2 of us to go on even some of the smaller ships and do some performing. It was so popular that I think they just started placing clowns and programs all over their fleets. But for me, it was like a type of clown training, my beginning clown training for sure. That was my first exposure to like that, you know, a style of clowning where I just learned, you know, I was forced to learn how to pass clubs and juggle clubs and balls and balance things, and to to walk on stilts, like I mentioned, and some of the classic ringling gags, like the pie gag, the banana eating gag. Like I learned a lot of traditional, sort of gags or clown routines. So that was a really, really cool education for me. It was kind of like my clown intensive, my clown school. Because I never did go to clown school, but that was the longest training that I had ever had. I went on and studied with lots of other clowns, but that was a definite shaped a beginning of like being officially trained for a clown.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing way to get your start, to just get out there and do it every day.
Yeah, definitely. We were just thrown in. We were definitely thrown in, and that ringling culture is so sort of hierarchy culture that we were the bottom of the barrel, so we were like sort of forced to catch up, and that pressure was on us. So it really gave us incentive to like to learn, to spend the hours that it takes to learn how to juggle clubs and pass clubs and knives, do all these gags and characters, and to be funny. So it was an intensive training.
Well, those are such intensely different sets of skills. I mean, the circus skills aspect and the being funny aspect are just, in my experience, wholly unconnected from one another. And learning to do a circus skill is just a matter of getting your training and getting your pyramids in, and your 5 4 3 2 1 repetitions and so on. But learning to be funny, that's a much more difficult process. I think there's a lot to be said for getting in front of a crowd and just doing it. And it sounds like that's what you guys did. You were out there in front of people, judging your gags and growing on a daily basis.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I learned a lot from that, like in terms of skills, for them, because they were so skilled and experienced, the funny and the skill went hand in hand. But a thing that I learned, because, obviously my skills weren't there, like I couldn't catch up because they were so far ahead, but they taught me how being the least skilled could be the most funny. So if we were doing a bit that was about skills, the audience identified with the one that didn't have those skills because that was them. So they would go and do these amazing things, and then I would do something ridiculous, and I would get all the applause because and all the laughs because they were. So yeah, it's when it comes to training, I think those things are separate, but when it comes to performing, I mean, at least from my experience with those ringing clowns, it's very much tied in together.
Let's talk a little bit about your time with Cirque. What was it like doing creation for Ladybug? Both times that you did it, what was the process like, and how did you go about creating the character and your part of the show?
Yeah, that was another really intense, interesting experience. When I first went to Montreal the first time at the beginning, it was just like uh, an amazing experience to go to their headquarters and see this total microcosm of like just circus creation, lights, costumes, this like building of busybodies creating circus, and it was awesome. So I was hired with two other clowns, and you know, uh, it was a unique show. It was their first Brazilian show, Brazilian director, first first female director in 25 years. This is their 25th show in 25 years. First time they ever had a woman director. First time they ever had a choreographer that was going to direct. And then, of course, I was the first African American woman to create a main character for them. So there was a lot of firsts, and it was an interesting experience because we were hired. We were all clowns that developed our own material. We were sort of independent out there in the world, and I think that's why they hired us. But then they didn't quite know how to use us. And the director being a choreographer, didn't know how to use us. And this is her first time directing circus, so she really didn't even know the function that clowns play in the circus or the choices that she can make for us. And she didn't really know how to support us. So it was a difficult time. It was a difficult creation, that first creation. It was hard to get space for the clowns. It was hard we were sort of fighting to be funny. We were spending a lot of days learning choreography and developing this this love story that she wanted. But she was only using, sort of the movement, and we were really fighting for, like, we're physical comedians, so we want, slapstick and gags and funny things to be happening and props. And that circus, big sort of, machine. So something that you would think is very simple takes a lot. Like, it's got to be requested, and then that person's got to call that person, and that person's got to call that person. You just like, you want to, I don't know, any sort of little prop. It has to go through, all this bureaucracy before you can, just get this one little prop to practice with. So anyway, it was navigating. None of us had worked for Cirque before, so it was navigating that system, working with someone that wasn't familiar with directing circus. So, man, I tell you, we were just thinking that we weren't going to make it, that we were going to get cut, actually. But what was great about timing was David Shiner was there starting to direct and develop Banana Spiel. And so Guy Lilliberte, who was the founder of Cirque du Soleil, saw a version of the show where we were not, like, we just thought he was going to see this version and just cut us. But what he did was he actually brought David Shiner in to help us. And what David Shiner did was sort of, he had the credibility to get us stage time, to get us sound effects, to let us show the material that we were developing on our own. He was credible there and well respected there, that he could carve space for us. So that was a gift. And once he was able to come in and sort of go, this is what your show needs, and these clowns need to be able to do this. They need stage time. They need to be in front of an audience, Once he was able to establish that for us, it got better. It wasn't exactly what we wanted, because it was like David Shiner came in maybe, 3 weeks before the opening of the show.
Wow.
Yeah, so it got us a little bit, but we were never really satisfied with what we had created. And we didn't, we still struggled with time and space even after we opened, and we just sort of went with it. And then once we went to the arena and we were going back to Montreal to recreate, I really kind of had to stand up to Cirque and say, look, the only way I'm going to come back and do this is if you give us free reign to create, and that we get to recreate this in a way that we're proud of, and we get to create some stuff and do it the way that we know how to do it. We're all creators here, so we know how to create shows. We traveled our shows everywhere, so you've got to trust us. And they did. So we got to get into a room and work with each other, and every week of that creation, we got to invite some of the staff in so that we could play our stuff in front of an audience and see what worked and what didn't. And I was very proud of what we were able to recreate within the same sort of storyline and construct. And so the arena show, while it wasn't my favorite venue, the material that we created, I was very proud of and really loved it. And it was a great sort of legacy to leave. I just got to see the show a couple months ago down in LA with my replacement, the woman who replaced me, and some of that same material that I created is there. It's strong. It's big laughs. I love it. I love the legacy. So overall, the experience was amazing. Of course, it had its challenges, but I got to travel the world. I got to perform in front of some of the most amazing audiences. I just got to go to work every day and do what I was sort of, born to do, which is rare and lovely. So overall, it was an amazing year. Loved it. Learned a lot.
That's amazing. We talked a little bit. You talked a little bit about creation through here. I mean, that's maybe what we've been talking about. But what is the process you go about to create new material? What is your process for making a new show or a new act? How do you go about it?
So my process is really to play. Begin by playing. Just play whatever with a prop. Play with an idea. Play. And then to sort of rehearse it, and then always show it. Those are the sort of the 3 steps that I go through when I'm creating. I mean, that's broken down, right? But the big thing about it is that having the freedom to play and discover and really sort of lean into the unknown in that, because out of the unknown comes new stuff. And the showing part is really important, because for clowns, I think you have to have an audience. You don't know what's going to work until you have an audience. Now, if you're in a trio, like I worked in that trio with Cirque, and there's some moments that just cracked us all up. And we just hysterically laughing, and we knew that was going to be funny. And that's going to kill, because if you're all laughing, then it's a good chance that the audience is going to laugh, and that turned out to be true. But in the end, when I'm creating something new, and even when I'm teaching workshops, I always like to have the showing at the end, because that's the final sort of lesson in a workshop thing. But as far as creation, I like to have many times that I get to show before the end result.
That actually swallowed up my next question, which was, how do you know if something's going to be funny before you've got it in front of an audience? And I have a very similar opinion that if it makes me laugh, then that's what matters. But I have some friends who are bound to have very different opinions, that they feel like the audience is key, and what makes the audience laugh is most important. For me, it's what makes me laugh is really the most important, because I figure if it makes me laugh, there'll be an audience for it out there.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I do tend to because I have such a different things crack me up, and I find that things that a lot of times crack me up don't necessarily crack the audience up. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a combination of both, and I think you're right. If it's funny to me, it's going to be funny to someone out there, but it may not be that audience that I'm going to on Friday night or whatever. Okay. So I use both. If it's cracking me up, and especially if I'm working in a duo or a trio, if it's cracking all of us up, it is we can count on that it's going to crack the audience up. But if it's one of us, and I've had this experience working with other clowns where we do something that cracks one of the clowns up. So he's like, this is funny, and we're fighting for this funny. And the other 2 clowns are like, that is not funny. And then when we get in front of the audience, it's funny. Or the opposite, it's not funny, So the audience to me is key. We've got to get in front of an audience, not only for if it's funny, but the timing of it, because something might not be funny, but it's just about timing. A lot of times that's what it's about. It's about timing. So I could do the same thing over again with a different timing, and then the folks laugh. So that's what a key for the audience is about, that awareness and that connection and that timing that you can get to the funny. So I tend to I think both of those things that we're talking about, whether if it makes you laugh, absolutely. If you're having a good time, even if you're having a good time, it could be enjoyable for an audience. But what truly makes like an audience laugh, like you can't tell that until you're in front of the audience. That's the conundrum with creating clown stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you do workshops now. Tell me a little bit about your work doing workshops.
Yeah. I have had a really great time sort of building these new workshops. And so I've always taught. I've taught since I was, in high school. And I've taught clowning for many years when after being in New York many years. But this last few years has gotten really intense. And, I've been crafting these different workshops during the pandemic really is when I started doing these workshops online. And then, excuse me, and then after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, this sort of awareness and openness that happened in our country around diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging sort of catapulted me into another realm where I've been asked to, where the clown industry, clown world has opened up about like its whiteness, right? Its male whiteness, and quite often since that since 2000, I've been the only person of color in the room in clowning, and I was dragged kicking and screaming into clowning because I didn't see anyone like me doing it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a bigger vision of it either. I had a way that I thought clowning was that kind of got squashed because now I realize that, a lot of folks that I grew up watching, Flip Wilson, Carol Burnett, all these were clowning, were clowns. But Whoopi Goldberg. And so, but anyway, I didn't see anyone like me. So it was difficult. I was like, what am I, I'm studied acting and I'm, I know that I get a good response for comedy, but clowning, what am I doing? I gave into it because I was making a living before I even knew what I was doing. But so anyway, so I had those experiences of being in spaces where I was the only person of color and that conflict because of the history that we have with clowning, which is connected to minstrelsy. I had all those emotions and whatnot, but I didn't know how to express them and I had no one else really to talk to about it. But since the pandemic and this awakening, I was asked to do some workshops that were BIPOC exclusive, and I didn't know where these participants were coming from, but I said yes to it, and turned out that many of the participants, there was like many in each class. I was like, wow, all these baby clowns of color. And what I realized is that many of them have been following my career and looking to me as a role model in this industry. And I didn't fully realize sort of the magnitude of me, being the first person of color to do a main character for Cirque du Soleil, to be in the hospital clowning, to have a one-woman show that was kind of like, I didn't realize that there was anyone watching, to be honest with you. I didn't know, I just didn't know. And so when I had that first workshop where I have these 12 performers of color that are interested in clowning looking at me going, you have been inspirational to us, I was blown away and I was really humbled by it. And I really was like, oh, okay, here's an opportunity where the door has been kicked open in the clowning world, and there's an awareness now that it's not, it's not such a diverse, industry, and it could use more diversity. So I started developing, and thinking about, the way that I've been taught clowning and how it's, could use, could expand on its approach to be able to reach more more diverse clown people that want to clown. And so I've been developing these workshops that with a DEI lens, with a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, that's not necessarily the way that I was taught by some of those, genius clowns, but that's, taking the experience that people of color have around clowning and circus and opening it up so that there's a path for learning this art, this beautiful art form. And so a lot of the workshops that I've been doing have been geared towards that. And I did a lot of workshops online over the pandemic, which then led to basically led to me now going in person and teaching the clown block at Del Arte International, which is in Blue Lake. And so I did that this year. I taught the clown block at their the professional training program. And then I've been invited back to do some online stuff this summer. And then I'm doing an intensive in August there, an in-person intensive 1 week there. And it's just opened up my possibilities and the possibilities for more performers of color to be introduced to the art of clowning without feeling, really it's an issue of vulnerability. But anyway, so being able to teach at clown school, or clown school down in LA, and for Laughter League and for Clown Gym in New York, and really just seeing more people of color come into these workshops. It's been fantastic. And then I just learned so much just as a performer by teaching in such an intense way. Man, it's been a great journey. And then just revisiting some of the trauma that I had early in my career, being the only person of color, and that dynamic, and sort of stuffing some of my feelings around that, and now being able to sort of really dive into that and get that out and talk with other performers of color about similar experiences. So it's just been, the workshop thing for the past few years has been extraordinary. I feel like I've got better at it. I've got better at performing by doing it, but really the teaching is really the strongest thing in my life right now. Is developing these workshops that approach clowning more in a way of like, oh, I'm not, like I'm some master clown, but really each participant has a clown in them that it's my job to like guide and find. Like I need to, I'm turning to being focused on the participant and finding what they already bring from their culture, from their friends, from their family. It's already in them. We just have to pull it out. It may not look like what is traditionally, the way that we're taught these by the greats, whether it's, whoever it is, Goye, or, whoever, the masters that all of these things are sort of stemming from, or I should say the geniuses. I try to not use the word master. I try to use the word genius. But anyway, so just finding new ways to make the art form inclusive, and give folks a sense of belonging in within this industry. Because really the history from clowning goes to Africa, it goes to Native Americans, and it's European, but we have to include all those things, because they're in the influence. There's influences all there. There's plenty all there, and there's amazingness in all of it. So we want to be welcoming to all those different ways. So yeah, I guess that's a roundabout way to say that I'm doing workshops, and I'm learning, and I'm trying to take a different and new approach, trying to break down that, white supremacist way of dealing that we all have, and trying to look at it through a different lens.
I actually wanted to ask you about the DEI aspects of your workshop, so thank you, because you got right into that. So that's really wonderful. You were just talking about inspirations just a moment ago. What were your inspirations in who the clown you became? Who were or what was the media or the clowns or the performers, whatever it is, that most impacted the clown that you ended up being?
Yeah, I grew up watching, Lucille Ball, who was probably the first woman that I saw like do a pratfall, and just was just funny and ridiculous. And then Carol Burnett, which was more real time. My time, Lucille Ball by that time was all reruns. By the time I was watching it, but Carol Burnett in real time, like her funny, and that show was just amazing to me. Flip Wilson, with his physical comedy and his sketches and his characters, really was a big influence on me. The Muppets. I think there's a lot of clowning in physical comedy and Muppets. And so those were the sort of influences that I had that made me, want to be funny. I didn't know that it was clowning, at the time, but those are the influences that I had. And of course, later in life, being introduced to Buster Keaton and even the research that I did for the Memory Project, Burt Williams, who was a minstrel. He was African Caribbean American in America, but he got into blackface because that was the only way he could do it. But you watch that old film and his communication, just physical communication, amazing clown. If you could, yeah, if all that horrible history wasn't there, and you're just looking at the art that he's doing, he's clowning. And I think that the history of like blackface and all that overshadows that, and rightly so. I mean, but when I was looking at that work of those African American or Caribbean American performers that were forced to get into blackface, but when I just look at their work, just look at their physicality, I'm like, wow, they're brilliant, amazing, funny clowns. And so that once later in life, once I saw that was influential. And then, of course, modern day clowns, the ones really are my peers that I look to, like Amy Gordon and Hillary Chaplin. And then some folks that I study with are Aitor Basori, John Davidson, and many others. But yeah, that's what comes to mind. And then some people that I just worked with, that I just directed, clown directed. I have to think of all these names. So now, now it's my name. It's escaping me. But she just did a show. Carolyn Rattray. Sorry, Carolyn Rattray just did an amazing solo theater clown piece that played at Boston Court down in Pasadena, California. That I went down there and directed the clown parts of it, and she's an amazing, phenomenal woman of color clown that's like expanding how we see clown and how we tell stories. She's amazing. She's inspiring though, as being a younger person than me. And she was one of those people that came to me and said, like, I've been watching you. Will you come down and work with me? And I was like, holy smokes, it's amazing.
It's beautiful. Well, on that same note, we're almost done, so I got a couple more questions for you. But on that note, if you could tag one person to be on the podcast after you, who would it be?
Carolyn Rattray. Yeah. Get her on and talk to her about her journey in clowning and her one-woman show that hopefully gets a longer life. It just closed. She's an amazing performer. and clown. Yeah.
Great. I will reach out to you for her contact after we're all done.
Yeah.
And lastly, last question for you before I let you go. Where can people find your work?
Oh, you can find my work at my website, michellenmatlock.com, or circleup.fun. Michelle Matlock on Instagram, and my name, Michelle N. Matlock, or Michelle Matlock on Facebook. Yeah, check out what's happening. I got a lot of fun stuff coming up. Yeah, those are all the places.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much. It was really excellent having you on the podcast. And
Thank you so much.
I look forward to seeing more of your work in the future.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure.
All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today on Ridiculous Life of a Clown. If you enjoyed this program and you'd like to get more of it, please consider sponsoring us on Patreon at patreon.com/picklewater. For as little as $1 a month, you can help make sure that this podcast keeps coming to your ears on a regular basis. Theme music by Kevin MacLeod.